But this little kid, he's probably like 14, ends up flying this plane through through a wormhole. Because to be perfectly honest, when you're watching this, you kind of forget you're watching an Indiana Jones movie at times because, and this is probably my biggest issue, is Indy takes a back seat for way too much of the movie. Sometimes literally. Yes, the time has finally arrived. I have seen Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. It's not really a day that I've been looking forward to so much as kind of dreading, but also morbidly curious about. Now, right from the get-go, I had problems with the premise. Now, I think all of us can agree that we thought Harrison was too old 15 years ago for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Although, having rewatched it recently, he didn't look too bad and he could still move pretty well. So in hindsight, that probably should have been the last movie. Granted, it wasn't a great finale, but if it had been great, then that should have been the end. But of course, a lot of us indie fans say it should have ended with Last Crusade, which I still stand by because, I mean, the name is a double entendre. I mean, it's like a double meaning, and it's both about like the Crusades, and this was the Last Crusade, but also the Last Crusade in terms of the last movie, the last adventure. But nonetheless, they spent 15 years making this movie, and this is what we got. So, I mean, my initial problems with the premise are, I mean, we weren't entirely wrong that it's about time travel. And by the way, this is going to have spoilers in it. And this is going to be kind of a casual, almost like a one-person conversation, like podcast style. I'm going to do an actual formal video review after this, but I just want to get my thoughts out there in a video because I just got back like an hour ago from the theater. So my problem with the premise is, well, it's a time travel device, and I already thought Aliens was too much, so this is even a step further being too much. But it has the same problem that I had with Crystal Skull, which is Indiana Jones, based on the original trilogy, he always goes after religious artifacts. The Ark of the Covenant, that was completely based in, like, religion. It was the box that held the Ten Commandments. And then with Temple of Doom, yeah, it's not like a Christian religion, but it is a religion of sorts. I mean, the village that he gets the stones for, they basically worship, I think it's, what is it, Shiva? And so that is still a religious artifact, technically. And then, of course, Last Crusade goes back to Christianity with the Holy Grail. And you could even say the Cross of Coronado. But then you get to Crystal Skull, and it actually, I mean, Crystal Skull, you could argue, is slightly religious because the ancients that were in Akator, I think they like worship these aliens as their god. So there is like a small hint of religion still in that movie. But this movie, so like I said, again, spoilers, I already knew this going in, but it was cool to see. They have the Lance of Longinus, however you say it, in this movie, although it's a fake. I really like that because Spear of Destiny was, as far as I know, one of the more popular stories that they never made into a movie. And that was about the Holy Lance, a.k.a. the Lance of Longinus, a.k.a. I think there's a bunch of different names, like the Lance of Christ and stuff like that. So I heard that before I saw this. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And that one of my biggest problems with this movie is you can kind of tell there's like 4 writers because it's like they threw a ton of stuff in this movie. They threw everything against the wall. And you can tell it was rewritten and reshot in some places because it's kind of a mess. So the first positive I can give is I really enjoyed the first like 25 minutes. Now, actually, before I forget this, I got to mention, I was kind of annoyed that they didn't continue the tradition of the Paramount Mountain. I know they probably couldn't do that because of legal reasons, and it was weird to see Disney and Paramount both on there. But why didn't you have the dissolve from the Paramount to something else, like another mountain? God, don't do the gopher again from Crystal Skull. But that was immediately I was like, okay, that just feels off to not have that. But the first 20 minutes feels like I kind of had a big grin on my face for the first like 25 minutes because it felt like the closest we're probably going to get to like a sequel to Last Crusade, because I think it's set in, what is it, 1939, so I think that's the year that Last Crusade takes place, so it's a little bit after Last Crusade. Maybe it's 40. I think it's 39 though. Anyway, it's after Last Crusade. Presumably Henry Jones Sr. is still alive at this point in the story. So I'm sure that Sean Connery, if he was still alive, he even said that he would come out of retirement to play him again, but obviously too late now. But this whole beginning sequence is he's on a treasure train for the Yahtzees. And speaking of them, I think the only reason they're in this movie is because... I think they wanted to move away from the Russians from the fourth one, because even though I thought they were okay villain, like I think they would have worked fine, especially for what's going on in today's world recently, with like Ukraine and all that. But they wanted to bring back the Yahtzees because they think that, and I'm saying that because of the algorithm. YouTube doesn't like that word, so they wanted to bring them back, and it's almost like they were like, well, how are we going to bring them back in the story if Indy is like 80 years old? And it's going to be set in the late 60s. And of course, they some dummy on the writing team raised their hand and was like, oh, how about time travel? And they're like, okay. Now, I'll get to the time travel element later, but because, to be honest, it was not as cringe as I thought it would be, like how they handle it. I still don't like it, though. But right off the bat, I will say the deep faking is actually really well done. Like, there's a few shots here and there that look wonky, don't look great. But for the most part, because I enjoyed that beginning so much, I would have preferred to see a whole movie set in the 30s again, like we all wanted, just with deep-faked Indiana, or recast, which I still think is a possibility. I'm going to make a video about what I think they could do with the future of this franchise. I think there still is a future. It's just a matter of, will Disney do the right thing? And unfortunately, the answer is probably no. But like that, it all felt classic indie, and cool little Easter egg that I don't know if you know about, but I found out the double for Harrison in the whole like 20-minute intro is actually Anthony Ingruber, the guy who got famous like a decade ago for his impressions of Harrison Ford, and then he's played him in a movie where it was a younger version, and then he has a cameo later in the movie when they're in, I think, Morocco. You can see him sitting there at the table, and I was like, that's cool. This dude was like a fan, and then he ended up being a part of the movie. I still think he could be, if he gets better at acting, I mean, he's working on it, but I think he could actually be in the new Indy. So yeah, they find the Lance of Longinus, and they realize it's a fake, and I don't want to maybe I'm looking too much into it, but to me it felt a little bit meta, like Disney not wanting to deal with like any religious artifacts, because why couldn't they have just had it be the real one? Like, why couldn't it just have been the real one? But they had to be like, nah, it's fake. And again, I don't want to say that Disney is trying to say that it's just like a bunch of hokey nonsense that nobody should believe in. But, I mean, if you look at it as from a purely historical sense, doesn't that actually exist? Like, obviously the Holy Grail, the like drinking of it and getting eternal life, that's the fictionalized part, but I think that spear actually exists out there. Like, because, I mean, Jesus was a real guy. They have him in the history books. So the element that goes into religion is whether or not you believe in like the resurrection and all that. But like, as far as I know, the lance is real. Either way, it was neat to see that, and that felt classic indie. But like this whole sequence, like I said, I really enjoyed. Again, yes, there's a little overuse of CGI, but you kind of can't avoid that these days. And the way he moves, you can tell it's like a younger man with like Harrison's younger face pasted on, because obviously he doesn't move like that anymore. And as soon as that sequence ends, that's when I think the movie begins its downward slide. Because you're just like hit in the face with reality. Like when you see him wake up, it's like, man, dude, he's so old now. It's like he's 80. And like I said, Crystal Skull, people were already making like old man jokes. This is just like, feels like elder abuse. But he wakes up from like a bender the night before, like hungover, and not too long after you find out, oh, he's divorced Marion. And I think that's a really stupid... I think the only reason they did that is because Karen Allen didn't want to be in the whole movie. Probably just agreed to a cameo. So they had to justify why she's not in the whole movie. Otherwise, she probably would have been. Same goes for Mutt. So again, I'm going to have spoilers, warnings all over this. But Mutt, he wasn't everyone's favorite character in Crystal Skull. Shia LaBeouf, say what you will about him, he's a pretty good actor. But back then, he was decent in the movie, but I don't think anyone really loves him. That doesn't mean I think they should have killed him off in Vietnam. Like, he addresses it later. He talks about how if he could go back in time, he would tell Mutt to not enlist. But they had to justify why neither him nor Marion's in the story, so they made them divorce. Well, they killed him off, which initiated the divorce because it kind of broke up their family. Yeah, it's a really crappy fate for Harry. Like, especially with that happy ending at the end of Crystal Skull. Why does Disney and Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy insist on giving our beloved heroes like tragic endings? Like they did it with Star Wars. They had a happy ending with Return of the Jedi, and then it completely gets undermined with the sequels. But that's a huge conversation for another time. I don't think this movie is as catastrophic as the sequel trilogy. I will say that. Now, that's not high praise, but it could have been, I think, much, much, much worse. And also, some of the leaks ended up being untrue. Do you remember the leaks back when they were saying that Indy meets up with like a younger version of himself from the past? And I was like, oh my god, this sounds terrible. They didn't do that. And the way I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm trying to get to the end too soon. I'll come to that later. Again, like I said, this is just me off the cuff. I didn't even make any notes. I'm trying to think back to, because I've seen it once now. I might see it again before I make my official review. I thought the supporting cast overall was pretty good. Mads Mikkelsen, probably the best part of the movie, honestly. Basil Shaw, played by Toby, is his name Toby Jones, right? He was good. I mean, he wasn't in it much. He was just in that intro, and then like later on in a flashback. Okay, there's this little kid who you can tell they were trying to make a new Short Round, and it just doesn't work. Like Short Round is charming, and we all love him just like by his like line delivery and his personality. But this guy was just annoying. I think his name is Teddy. I just call him Unibrow Kid because he's got a unibrow. I will jump ahead for this part, but one of the dumbest parts of this movie, and there's a lot of dumb parts, was I remember being like, I was like shaking my head and going, what? In the theater when there's a part where he's in a tuk-tuk, Indy and Helena and Teddy, and it breaks down and the engine won't work, and then Indy just takes his gum and puts the gum on the engine, and the engine starts up again. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then Indy says something about, oh, it's heat resistant. And I'm like, this is stupid. Did you really just use chewing gum to fix the engine? Yeah, they say it won't hold, but either way, this was stupid. And then another dumb thing with Teddy is later on in the movie, I mean, some of the moments in the writing doesn't make any sense, and this is one of them where Helena asks him like, "Can you fly a plane?" And he's like, she basically asks him a pointless question about like, can he fly that plane? And then she's like, "Well, no, you can't fly any plane." And it's like, well, why did you ask him in the first place then? But this little kid, he's probably like 14, ends up flying this plane through a wormhole. Again, getting ahead of myself, but that's the part I'm going to talk the most about is the insane third act. That's even more insane than the ending of Crystal Skull, if you can imagine such a thing. But honestly, the movie feels plotting, and I was bored a lot of the time. The movie, you ever watch a movie that's, it's like 2.5 hours, but it feels like 4? This movie felt 4 hours. It drags, and like it's just, and that's not good for an Indiana Jones movie, because that original trilogy, it just moves. There's no slowing down, and the scripts are tight. Like they convey a ton of information very quickly and efficiently. Basically, no plot holes. Like those first three movies are just. I just want to rewatch those after watching this, because to be perfectly honest, when you're watching this, you kind of forget you're watching an Indiana Jones movie at times because, and this is probably my biggest issue, is Indy takes a back seat for way too much of the movie. Sometimes literally. Like there's parts where Shaw is driving and he's just in the back. And again, I understand he's old, but like that's why you should have done, which I've addressed this in another video I've done before. You should have made this a frame story, and what that means is you should have just started with Harrison and he's sitting in like a rocking chair, he's retired, and he recounts a tale that happened back in like the 40s. And then you have another actor play him for the whole movie. It's a recounting of a tale, and then the movie ends with Harrison again, and he's still in the rocking chair, and then he wraps up a story. But you could have done that to where you don't have 80-year-old Harrison Ford trying to do stunts. And yeah, like when he rides the horse, you can tell that that's not him. Some of those shots have not improved from the trailer. Like we all remember that really bad shot of him on the horse. That face replacement looks horrendous. I think probably 90% of his stunts in this movie were done by other people, but he doesn't really have that many times where he would need a stuntman. Because like I said, he takes a back seat. There's not much of him punching and kicking. And the times he does do it, they edit it in a way that you can't see his whole body, so you can't see how he doesn't run fast and all that kind of stuff. But it just drives me insane to see... Oh, like, I'm actually going to make a montage when this comes out on video. Over and over and over and over and over and over again, they have to have Phoebe Waller-Bridge one-up him. Like, and it starts from the beginning. Like, he's in the classroom talking about archaeology. Nobody cares. They all want to see outside with the parade going on with the Apollo astronauts coming back. They're all... Like, that's what a theme they had throughout this movie is people... I mean, Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen, even says that people don't care about people like us anymore. They care they care about astronauts, not archaeologists. Everyone's looking forward to the future, not looking back to the past. It's almost like a really not so subtle play on what they did in Last Jedi. And yeah, I hate to bring that comparison up, but it can't be avoided. It's same people really behind it. Disney, Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm. Modern Lucasfilm has been basically an unmitigated disaster. This is probably the least bad thing they've done, which still is, again, is not saying much. But it really does feel like the Kylo Ren line, the let the past die, kill it if you have to. That's what it feels like. And when you constantly see, like, you know how in the other movies, he would take the lead and his, like, sidekick would always be trailing him whenever he does anything? Indy would rescue them. Yeah, he was rescued a couple times by other people. Like, Willie rescued him in Temple of Doom when him and Short Round were stuck. But this movie happens constantly. He's getting held at gunpoint. At the end of the movie, you got Helena going after him in a plane. Or, no, on a motorcycle. And then she jumps up on a plane. And it's like, it feels like Indy has no agency. Like, everything that you would have expected Indiana Jones to do in this movie, that part was given to her. Like, if there was an action scene, he kind of sits there in the background and goes, "Whoa," and like stumbles around, shuffling around like an old man, while she takes the lead and punches people. It's really depressing to watch. Like I said, as soon as that intro ends and you see what modern Harrison Ford is like, it's just depressing, man. Which is why I think most people agree this movie was a bad idea from the start. If you were going to make an Indy 4 and 5, you should have made them in the 90s. Go back and watch Young Indiana Jones. That episode with Harrison Ford where he's got a beard and he's like 50, he still would have been amazing at that time for like older Indy. So if you wanted to do like, in an ideal world, we would have got like 6 of these and you would have made the other 3 in the 90s. But again, that didn't happen. Same thing with the prequels. If you wanted to make sequels, you should have made them in the 90s. You waited too long. Because you have to adjust the plot. Like, I think Indy in the 50s doesn't really work. Like, Indy is supposed to be, those stories are supposed to be in the 30s and 40s because that's what the like the serials that it's based on, those are all set then. So trying to morph it into something it's not, like a 1950s B movie, doesn't work. And then trying to make it like a sort of political like it feels like they're trying to make it a political thriller in the beginning when Indy's being like tracked down by like secret agents. And the space race and all that, like Indy in the 60s, I also don't think doesn't work. And to go along with what I said about how it doesn't feel like an Indy film, the entire first half of the movie, he's in, not the first half, maybe the first act. Besides the intro, like the prologue, the first act is all in, I think, is that supposed to be New York? I think it was. And it just doesn't feel right to have that setting, or where Indy is. Or no, didn't they say Alabama? I don't know where it was. Wherever they were, didn't feel like Indiana Jones. Indy's supposed to be gallivanting all around the world, and yeah, he does later on. He goes to Tangiers and all these other places. And the way the action is directed, like, James Mangold's a good director. He's made some great movies, but I think he was just saddled with, like, because Spielberg backed out, he had to, like, hobble together a script, and even he rewrote some of it himself. So you can't really blame him for that, but like his directing style, he tries to imitate Spielberg in like the intro sequence, but later on you can tell it doesn't have that Spielberg flavor. Like Spielberg is just so good and he has a certain style. James Mangold doesn't quite get there. Like the chase sequence in Tangiers goes on way too long, and just the way it's filmed and edited is a lot different than how Spielberg would do it. And like overall, the plot is very, very thin. Like it's really kind of almost just a chase movie, because you got Mads Mikkelsen's character wants the dial because he finds him again later on, and he's like, oh, I recognize you, and obviously he remembers him from decades earlier. And also in typical like modern day fashion for a lot of movies, they don't let anything sit like emotionally. Like there's a really good scene. I actually really like the part when Sala shows up, and he's got that back and forth with Indy. That scene was great. I thought just that little. I thought that was all he was going to have, and Sala really only has 2 scenes, but that scene was good when he comes in, and because he talks about his grandkids and how he introduces them to Indy, and he says, this is the guy that brought us to America, and I'm like, that's really cool. So Indy at some point after Last Crusade was able to get Sala's family to come to America, and I like that little detail. But like you have this heartfelt heart-to-heart between the two, and then Indy goes to walk away and almost gets hit by a car, and it's like, why do you have to undercut that scene? It's like some of the bad Marvel humor where you want them to take the scene seriously, and then it's constantly undercut every time. It's like you don't want the audience to feel anything, like feel sad or bad for too long, so you immediately have to do that, and I hate it. Like, stop doing that. Let a scene sit for once, please. Now, one of the sequences I actually really liked in this movie was, well, there is a scene within this scene I don't like, and that's, so they meet up with, not Anthony, Antonio Banderas, his character. I already forgot his name. It was like Ronaldo or something. Rennie, he calls him. There's like too many characters in this movie, I think, and it's a problem. He meets up with him, who's like a diver, and like, they have to dive underwater to this ancient Roman ship to find the other half of the dial. And it's a really cool scene because, like, we've never seen Indy do any, like, undersea exploration or, like, deep-sea treasure hunting. So that whole scene was cool. And they got, like, the new because you always have some kind of creepy crawlies in these movies. It was snakes in the first one, and then bugs in 2, and then rats in 3, ants in 4. And then this one you do have bugs later, but in this scene you have eels. So they go down there, and the sequence is really cool to see them all diving under. All that I could think the whole time I'm watching this scene, though, all I could think of is, man, I wish this movie was just the fate of Atlantis. Like, this movie should have been about him looking for Atlantis, because that's a really cool MacGuffin. And it was a popular game, and like I think it works for a plot for Indiana Jones. You know what? Maybe just for fun, I might edit together a fake trailer for a Fate of Atlantis movie using some of this footage when the movie comes out. That'd be fun. But yeah, I really like that sequence, but I mean, on the boat later, I really didn't like that scene, and it's just another of many scenes where she has to constantly upstage him, where she's like, he refuses to translate the tablet, and then she goes on and on and on about how much she knows about this, and she literally explicitly says later in the film, like, Teddy says, like, oh, I thought you weren't going to let him be in charge, and she's like, no, I'm still in charge. So they explicitly say she's in charge really the whole time during the movie, sort of, and like, Indy's just along for the ride. Like, it just feels like he has no agency, and it sucks. We wanted to, yes, he's 80, but we wanted to see him be like a badass like one more time, and why couldn't you give him that? Yeah, and honestly, the second act drags on for so long that, like, it feels like there's 4 acts to this movie, honestly, because the prologue feels like the first act, like the prequel section where it's a younger Indy. That feels like the first act, but it's not. It's only like a prologue. And then the second and third act feel like combined, and it's just dragging, and then it's almost like there's a fourth act, and that's the last bit. But honestly, there's not much I'm already forgetting what happened in acts, in like the second act, because it just goes on for so long that it's just boring a lot of the time. Yeah, you can tell a lot of it was probably reshot and rewritten. But when they finally get to the tomb of Archimedes, first of all, I think it's very strange that they encounter like no problems getting there. Like, I mean, anytime he goes into a tomb in the other movies, there's booby traps, it's treacherous to get in there. But actually, you know what? I'm just now realizing there was a scene in the trailer that wasn't in this final cut. There's there's a scene in the trailer where she like pushes this small boulder with it, and I don't remember that being in the movie. I don't think that was in it. But like there was no traps or anything. And that's what's fun about him basically tomb raiding. Well, speaking of tomb raiding, it's not really tomb raiding, but I had a problem with a lot of Helena's dialogue, especially that stupid line from the trailer where she's like, he stole it, then I stole it, then you stole it. It's called capitalism. Like, no, that's actually the complete opposite of capitalism, but okay. Don't understand that line and it doesn't make any sense. But she tells him, she calls him like an aging grave robber, which is absurd because if you go back and watch like Last Crusade, those dudes in the beginning that when he's a Boy Scout, those guys are grave robbers because they're just trying to sell stuff. He's the one and he's like, no, I'm actually protecting history, and he is. And it's like really hypocritical for Helena to say that because she's basically the grave robber. She's just in this for the money. She's willing to sell this to Voller like immediately. So if anyone's the grave robber, it's her, and yet she has the gall to call Indy that, and it's like ridiculous. It'd be different if Indy was doing this for the money. Like yes, he says fortune and glory in like this in the second movie. He gets paid to be a professor, like he gets paid by the university, but he's not selling it to like he's not pawning off these things that he finds. So the idea that he's a grave robber is absurd, and it's just this stupid jab that Helena gets in. That you know what I was thinking when I was watching this. This whole movie feels like and I think this was the original plan. It feels like a backdoor pilot to a Helena TV show, which is basically what it was going to be. I think that show is canceled now, but they were going to do a show with her. She was essentially going to be the new Indiana Jones. They even give her a fedora, for God's sake, at one point. Or it looks like a fedora. She wears like a white hat that looks like it. And it's like, come on, you can tell that. And I totally believe those reports that apparently there was like 4 or 5 different endings. And there was an ending that Indy died, and the worst ending that thank God they didn't choose, is that she picks up the hat, Indy dies, and then Helena like relives history again, but in like she is in the place of Harrison, so like she gets to redo all the movies, but as her. And you can just tell that Kathleen Kennedy was salivating at the thought of that idea, because there's this meme. Maybe I'll put it up. But there's a meme that's perfectly exemplifies what she's done, and she has replaced. I think she has some like deep-seated bitterness from over decades of working with Spielberg and George Lucas, and I think she's bitter that she didn't come up with any of these ideas. Spielberg has said in an interview, I don't know if I could find the clip, but he has said that she pitched ideas back in the day while they would be making these movies, and they'd all like laugh and be like, "That's terrible," like because they were like she had bad ideas. So this feels like her just being a petty bitch, trying to get back at Spielberg and Lucas by crapping all over their creations. And not only that, always trying to replace the lead character with a brunette British woman. Well, yeah, she's not British, but she always puts a self-insert in these movies. Rey is a self-insert for herself. Jyn Erso in Rogue One, a self-insert for Kathleen Kennedy. Helena, definitely a self-insert for herself. Willow, same thing. So every franchise that Lucasfilm owns has been completely decimated by this lady, and yet she still refuses to leave or be fired. She must know where the bodies are buried, because why has she not been fired yet? I don't know. She's taken 2 multi-billion-dollar franchises now and completely run them into the ground. And yeah, like overall, I don't think this movie is very good. There are moments I like. It's tough to say if it's better or worse than Crystal Skull. It's probably worse. Yeah, it's probably worse because like it's paced really poorly and strangely. The editing is weird. Anyway, but I just went off on a tangent. But I want to address the ending because I think it's absurd. So yeah, it's not as like it could have been even more ridiculous, which is crazy to think. But like what I was imagining when I heard that there was going to be time travel and some kind of time portal that opens, I was expecting like a rectangular portal door appears and like Harrison walks through it and then they're back in time. No, it's not quite that dumb. It's done slightly more tastefully, but not much, because they like adjust the dial to like a specific date and like coordinates, and then there's a storm that appears for some reason. I don't know why, and they have to fly into the storm, and that's when Teddy somehow miraculously flies a plane, even though he's never flown a plane in the world. He also hot wires it, which I don't think that's how it works. He hot wires a plane and flies it into the storm, which I don't think would work. I think planes get shredded in storms, and they don't fly correctly either. Like, they'll go haywire. Like, the altimeter would screw up and all that. But apart from that, like, it's just a portal in this, like, because Voller thinks that this could take him to whatever time he wants. So his goal, I do like, he has a pretty good motivation as a villain. Like I said, he's probably the best part of the movie. And he's just a great, he's a great Yahtzee. Like, him and Thomas Kretschmann, who's in the prologue. Both, when I heard that they're both in this movie, I'm like, oh, that's great casting for Yahtzees, because he basically played one already in Age of Ultron when he was the dude with the monocle. But yeah, so he wants to go back and basically kill Hitler and become the new Fuhrer. I mean, that at least he has a motivation. Like, there's a lot of movies where like there's just no motivation at all for the villain, but he screws up and doesn't account for the fact that there was continental drift over the millennia, and so they're not going to end up in the right time and space. I say he's got a good motive, but it is kind of weird that he's like obsessed with mathematics. Like, they really don't want you to think this is supernatural, because they know how much people hated Crystal Skull, and they're like, oh no, it's mathematics, it's not supernatural, don't worry, it's math. And because he's like, oh, I've already conquered space, now I gotta conquer time. And it's like, okay, like, that's a cool concept that he created the rockets that went to the moon, because that actually happened. You had, what was that project called? Was it the Manhattan Project? Is that the one where they... No, that was the nuclear bomb. Whatever project it was where former Yahtzees built, like, those scientists built the rockets that took our people to the moon. So, cool idea for a villain, but weird that he's like saying, I'm going to conquer time now, and it's like absurd. But yeah, like, it opens a rift in time. It's ridiculous. And you know, the thing about third acts in the indie movies are they're pretty vague. Yeah, they're supernatural, but like, the vaguer the better, and it works better. So like, the ending of Raiders, yeah, it's essentially a box that opens that's full of ghosts, but it's not too over the top. Yeah, their faces melt and stuff, but it's aping those old 1930s serials, and it works, and it doesn't go on for too long, and it's not like the ghosts like turn into people and the people start running around, and like, it doesn't go on for very long. It's pretty vague about what happened, and they can't look at it, and so you don't really know what happened, and it works for that. Same thing with Temple of Doom. Like, he rips the guy's heart out. That's ridiculous, but it's just like waved away as like black magic, which works. They don't have to over explain things. And then in Last Crusade, that's also pretty vague, where it's like, drink from the cup, you'll get you'll have eternal life, but you have to stay there, but otherwise you do get some kind of healing factor from it. But that's as far as it goes. And then Crystal Skull, they start to go off the rails with the alien and blowing up Spalko's head and the whole place crumbling and the UFO taking off, and it's like, that was already like, okay, you guys have jumped the shark. This one not only jumps the shark, it takes the shark and launches it out of a cannon over Mount Everest, because it is... Whew. Yeah. So they go through the portal, and also I was spoiled. I knew basically the whole plot before I went in to see this. It doesn't really bother me, because like, I wasn't expecting much of this. I still wanted to see how it was portrayed, though. How it was like, the context of it all. So they go through this portal. Voller thinks they're going to end up in 1939, but no, they end up in, what was it, like 2000 BC or 5-something BC? And they're like flying. This part was kind of dumb. They're flying over Roman ships, and well, first of all, it's stupid why they didn't just fly higher. They're flying super low, and they got all these primitive weapons they're still pretty good for the time. They're what are those called? Ballistas? They got ballistas. They're firing massive arrows into the plane, and they think they're dragons because they're like, no, they don't know what's going on. And it's just ridiculous. Like, they're actually in the past now, flying around in planes, and why? All you got to do is fly higher. Those ballistas don't have that good of a range. So just fly out of range of the ballistas. I don't get it. And then also, I don't understand why they start shooting at them. What, they're not. They weren't really. Yeah, they were shooting at you, but just fly higher. Like, for some reason, Klobber, I think is his name, Klaber. Him and the other guys just start shooting them out of the window. They reach out and start shooting at the guys in the boat. It's like, what are you doing that for? There's no reason. And at this point, also, Indy is shot. He's been shot in the chest for a while. And that just further makes him have even less agency than he already did, which was not much. So now he's babysat the whole movie, and it sucks. But yeah, this whole sequence was bonkers, and like, I really like Mads Mikkelsen, and they kill him off so unceremoniously. Like, the plane crashes, and he's just dead, like basically off screen. You just see him lying there, his face is gone from the fire, and he's just dead. And I'm like, oh, that was lame. And then you see the actual Archimedes, because they've talked a lot about him, and actual Archimedes shows up and talks to Indy. I keep wanting to call him Harrison. Probably because it doesn't feel like an indie movie. And so he's literally talking to history. Like, you can tell they want this to be like this grand finale, and that's why it's so long about like, oh, look, it's come full circle. He's an archaeologist now. He's literally talking to the past. And the thing that betrays his character in this is he basically says, let me stay here and die. And it makes me shudder because it gives me flashbacks, horrific Vietnam flashbacks to Last Jedi, when Luke's basically like, no, I came to this island to die. It's like, why? You have no reason to stay here. And he says there's nothing left from back in 1969. And this is probably the worst part of the movie, is like, I think it's just pure character assassination. Like, I don't think he would choose to stay back there in the past. It's stupid. Not to mention, he'd mess up time, because this whole ending creates a time paradox. It creates a closed loop time paradox, because when they find Archimedes' tomb, he's got a watch on, and there's like propellers on the carvings of the dragons or whatever. And then when he meets Archimedes, he ends up with Voller's watch. And so it's like Terminator 2. It's like a closed loop paradox. So that kind of screws up a lot. I don't know. It's really stupid. And Indy should not have been like, oh, I'm going to stay here and die because I'm old and depressed and nothing's there for me. And then to cap off the nonsense with Helena, like, just upstaging him, she just knocks him out. She punches him, knocks him out cold, and then he wakes up in modern day, and she basically is like, well, I had to do what I had to do. You wouldn't follow me. And so, yeah, they end up back in modern day. And again, I knew about this cameo, but Marion walks in, and then they have another great moment I really like, where they do the reverse of what they did in Raiders, where he's like, where does it hurt? Or she's like, where does it hurt? Or in this case, she says, or she holds her elbow up, he kisses her elbow, the forehead, like all that stuff, like from the first movie. That was a nice moment to have them reunite. It's just a shame they had to, in between movies, they had to have them divorce and kill off Mutt. But whatever, if you're going to justify Shia LaBeouf and her not coming back, there could have been other ways to do it. He could have just written them out another way, but no. Also, they didn't mention John Hurt's character at all. Yeah, John Hurt's dead, but no mention of Oxley, what happened to him. And then the other professor guy, played by Jim Broadbent in the fourth movie, no reference to him. I don't even think a reference to Brody, right? I don't think so. There's a reference to Henry Sr., how it was his dad's watch, but that's about it. So, yeah, and then they didn't do the stupid ending where she takes the hat. That was apparently a possible ending. The hat just kind of to kind of close this. They do that iris circle down to the hat, and then Indy grabs it. So I'm glad he didn't die. I heard some people in the audience getting mad when he was like, "No, let me die here." People were expecting him to actually die, but I'm glad they didn't do that. It doesn't feel definitive though. Like, it feels like they could do more, but Harrison's 80. He's not going to do more. He said so. I think there could have been a good movie here with another edit with a few more rewrites, maybe, but it's really hard to do. Like I said, the concept of a fifth movie is going to be hard without recasting. With an 80-year-old Indy in the 60s, trying to somehow shoehorn the Nazis back in, it was always going to be a tall task. And I think the MacGuffin is weird. The Dial of Destiny is just a weird MacGuffin. Like, there's so many. You could have made the whole movie about the Spear of Longinus. You could have been Atlantis. You could have done the Staff of Kings from the game. So many other things you could have done. But you had to go with time travel. So, whatever. Wow. Yeah, so I have talked for a long time. But, like I said, I'm probably going to make a more succinct review of my thoughts in the next few days of the movie that's scripted, because this was just me rambling like a podcast. So yeah, it's probably at the bottom of the heap for the 5 movies, but wasn't really expecting much. I will probably still buy it though. Like, I'm a completionist, although I don't own the sequel trilogy. For this series, though, I kind of want to be a completionist because I do like that beginning 20 minutes. Like, I kind of just want to buy it just for that intro that feels like it could have been the beginning of... It's like a small 25-minute long sequel to Last Crusade that could have been cool. So for that alone, and for the purposes of making some edits, that I'm like, maybe I'll try my hand at editing it down to a better movie. I don't know. And I do kind of want to collect all the... I want to buy, like, replicas of all the MacGuffins from all the movies. Even the Dial. Even though the movie's not great, I kind of just want to have all the MacGuffins. But, yeah, it's not great. Like I said, it's not as catastrophic as what they did with, like, Luke and even Han, because Han is dead. They didn't kill him off. But I still don't think that it was a good send-off for him. There's so many other things you could have done. So, like, to Indiana Jones fans, I guess take it or leave it. Like, go see it if you want. I know a lot of normies are, like, enjoying it, but, like, I even heard some people clap at the end, which was surprising. But, knowing what could have been, it's pretty disappointing. So, I don't recommend it. I mean, you do what you want with your money, but I don't know if I'm even going to see it again. Like, if somebody asked me to go again, I probably will. But I'm not going to pay to see it again. Yeah, I mean, that's really all I have to say. Like, I've talked about this movie for years now on this channel. I made a video that made a lot of people angry called Indiana Jones... The universe doesn't want Indiana Jones 5 to be made, and I got a lot of hate for that video. So, we'll see what people think about this one. But, yeah, like I said, I'm going to work on a shorter review, but this is just my initial thoughts. A lot. I talked for way longer than I expected. So, if you stayed to the end, thank you. I'm going to have to put something in here to fill in the time so you have something to watch while you listen to me. But, thanks for watching. And check out my other Indiana Jones related videos that I'm doing. I just played Emperor's Tomb. And keep an eye out for my more formal review. So, alright, until next time, catch you later. Peace out.